Welcome to the InfoSec Insider podcast, brought to you by URM, the UK's leading information and cybersecurity specialists.
Hi, my name's Annie and I'm here today with Maritn Brazier, who is a senior consultant here at URM. Welcome to another episode of InfoSec Insider. So today Maritn and I are going to be talking about the EU Artificial Intelligence Act. So first of all, Maritn, would you mind giving me just a quick breakdown of what is artificial intelligence?
Well, the first point to make, I suppose, is that this is an EU Act. And because it came after Brexit, it doesn't affect the EU directly, but there will be some knock-on effects, which we'll speak about as we go along. Well, the question of what is artificial intelligence is a really good one, because there hasn't been an agreed legal definition of artificial intelligence, and there still isn't one in the UK. The problem with it is that it covers a wide scope of technology, and quite a lot of the technology which is marketed as AI is not in actual fact AI at all. But the definition from the EU AI Act is a machine-based system that is designed to operate with various levels of autonomy and that may exhibit adaptiveness after deployment, and that, for explicit or implicit objective, infers from the input it receives how to generate outputs such as predictions, content, recommendations, or decisions that can influence physical or virtual environments, which is a bit of a mouthful. But the Act also defines what is a general purpose AI model, which is a model which is trained with a large amount of data, sort of using self-supervision at some scale, and displays sort of generality and is capable of competently performing a wide range of distinct tasks. And a general purpose AI system is a system which is based on a general purpose AI model and has the capability to serve a variety of purposes, both for direct use as well as for integration into other AI systems. So there are other laws which are applicable in the EU that affect the development of AI, including the EU General Data Protection Regulation and the Product Liability Directive, which grants those harmed by software a right to compensation. So that's basically a very complex and difficult to understand definition of artificial intelligence.
Perfect, thank you, Maritn. And what does the EU AI Act say?
Well, broadly, it sets out the scope of where it applies and how it applies to a number of what it calls compliance roles performed by organisations. It includes the categories of risk posed by AI and the obligations placed on those with those compliance roles in relation to those risks. So the Act defines the scope as applying to providers putting on the market or putting into service AI systems, or placing onto the market general purpose AI models in the EU, irrespective of those whether those providers are established or located in the EU or within a third country. It also includes deployers of AI systems that have their place of establishment who are located within the EU, and providers and deployers of AI systems that have their place of establishment outside the EU, but where the output produced by the system is used in the EU. It includes importers and distributors of AI systems. It includes project manufacturers placing AI systems on the market. It includes authorised representatives of providers for those that are not established in the Union, and includes affected persons that are located in the European Union. And much of that is very similar in tone and style to the territorial scope of the General Data Protection Regulation. So there's some crossover there.
You mentioned compliance roles. What are they, and what are the obligations associated with them?
Well, the Act defines a number of compliance roles, the first one being that of a provider which means a body that develops an AI system or general purpose AI model, or has an AI system or a general purpose AI model developed and places them on the market or puts the system into service under its own name, whether it's for payment or is free of charge. A deployer is anybody who is using an AI system under its authority, except where that system is used in the course of a personal, non-professional activity. An authorized representative is any person located or established in the European Union who has received and accepted a written mandate from a provider of an AI system to perform and carry out on its behalf the obligations and procedures established by the AI Act. An importer means anybody who is established in the Union that places on the market an AI system from outside the Union. A distributor means any organisation other than the provider or the importer that makes this an AI system available on the EU market. An operator means the provider, the product manufacturer, the deployer, the authorized representative, or the importer or the distributor. So that one's quite a wide one.
Perfect. Thank you, Martin. I've noticed that the theme of risk seems to run through the Act. How does it sort of categorise risk?
Well, firstly, the AI Act prohibits outright those systems that present what it terms to be an unacceptable risk, including putting those systems on the market or putting them into service. So, for example, the things that would be an unacceptable risk are where the AI systems are deploying subliminal techniques that is not normally within the consciousness of an individual, or any purposes which are manipulative or deceptive. It also bans anything which exploits any of the vulnerabilities of an individual or a group of individuals. It prevents any use for evaluating or classifying people or groups based on their social behaviour or known, inferred or predicted personal social score. I think there's a bit of a link there to the Chinese social credit system, which is now being deployed in China, which is widely used to score individuals as to their suitability to be Chinese. It also bans biometric categorization systems that categorize individuals based on biometric data or used to deduce or infer their race, political opinions, trade union membership, religious or philosophical beliefs, sex life or sexual orientation. And anybody familiar with data protection law would recognize all of those things as being what is termed special category data in the GDPR. And it also bans any real-time biometric identification systems in publicly accessible spaces for the purpose of law enforcement, unless for purposes stipulated in the Act. And again, here there's this would include things like facial recognition in real time in public spaces, which is something that's being deployed in the UK at the moment. It goes on to classify risk levels at three levels. One is high risk, those systems which are either used as a safety component of a product or which are deployed in certain areas like education, employment, access to public services and law enforcement. So any systems and providers falling into that category of high risk must be registered with the EU and must comply with a range of requirements, which would include training, governance, record keeping, some technical controls, human oversight, so not entirely AI decided, and information security. It classifies those at limited risk of those systems which interact directly with people, including chatbots, emotion recognition systems, biometric categorization systems, and so on. And providers and deployers of these systems must comply with a range of transparency requirements. So, for example, systems that produce audio or visual image which appear genuine but are actually produced by AI are required to declare that the content has been produced by AI. Although those which are evidently, and that's in inverted commas, artistic, creative, or satirical, have reduced disclosure requirements. And they also have those which are low or minimal risk. And those are the systems which don't fall into either of the other two risk categories. And there's no specific obligations under the Act for low or minimal risk systems.
So how does the regulation work in practice?
Well, the Act requires that each EU member state will establish what's called a notifying authority and a market surveillance authority, and ensure that they have the necessary technical abilities, funding, and staffing to fulfil their duties under the Act. So that means that the notifying authority will set up and carry out assessment and designation procedures, and the market surveillance authority will report to the EU Commission and enforce compliance at a national level. An AI office in the Commission will enforce common rules across the EU and will advise and assist member states on consistent and effective application of the Act throughout the EU.
And what about enforcement? How's that going to work?
Well, again, there's a parallel here with the GDPR, because military penalties range from €7.5 million or up to 1% of global annual turnover for the supply of incorrect, incomplete, or misleading information, and €35 million or up to 7% of global annual turnover for non-compliance with those AI practices which are prohibited. And this is the upper limits of those fines, whilst the model is similar to GDPR, are even higher than those in GDPR.
So this is an EU piece of legislation, and the UK has now left the EU. So what will be the UK approach to AI legislation?
Back in February 2024, the UK government published its response to a white paper consultation on AI regulation. It's the regulatory framework led by the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology, and is underpinned by core principles designed to address key risks with AI systems. So like the EU Act, it's cross-sector, so it applies to everybody and applies a technology-neutral approach. But in contrast to the EU Act, there's no formal definition of AI, but instead it's a sort of outcomes-based approach which focuses on the adaptability and autonomy of its interpretation. Existing regulators, such as the Information Commissioner's Office, Financial Conduct Authority, and Ofcom, can interpret adaptivity and autonomy to create specific definitions if they wish, but this raises a concern that different interpretations could be applied by different regulators, thereby creating confusion for those operating across regulators or sectors. The government framework distinguishes between highly capable general purpose AI, which are models that can perform a wide variety of tasks and match or exceed the capabilities present in today's models. They will span from novice through to expert capabilities, with some even showing pretty superhuman performance across a range of tasks. It includes a highly capable narrow AI, and these are models that can perform a narrow set of tasks, normally within a specific field, such as biology, for example, with capabilities that match or exceed those present in today's most advanced models. Includes AI agents, such as an emerging subset of AI technologies that can competently complete tasks over long time frames and with multiple steps. These systems use tools such as coding environments, the internet, narrow AI models to complete the tasks. The framework also includes 5 principles which apply across all sectors and regulators, and include safety, security and robustness, the appropriate transparency and explainability, fairness, accountability and governance, and contestability and redress for when things go wrong. And the strategy for implementing those core principles, which again sound very familiar to anybody who knows data protection law. So that's predicated on, first of all, leveraging existing regulatory authorities and frameworks. There's no plans, for example, to introduce a new AI regulator. So neither the implementation of the principles nor the requirement for regulators to collaborate will be legally binding, although the government anticipates the need to include a legal duty on them maybe in the future. There's also a sort of a coordinating central function to facilitate risk monitoring and to support regulation and coordination. And given the widespread use of AI, individual regulators can't fully address the opportunities and risks posed by AI. So the government set up a new central function within DCIT to monitor and evaluate risks, promote coherence and address the gaps. And there's also a multi-regulator advisory service, the AIM Digital Hub, which is being piloted to help innovators in AI to navigate the multiple regulatory obligations and facilitate compliance. So that sort of framework approach is in contrast to the EU, and indeed the US's more prescriptive, legislative-driven approach. But there's a growing recognition that legislation is maybe required going forwards because the framework is very loose, and it leaves it open for a lot of interpretation. The previous government didn't propose legislation or mandatory measures, and went as far as saying that legislation would only be introduced if specific conditions are met. They would need to be confident that existing legal powers are insufficient and that the voluntary transparency and risk management are ineffective. But we have a new government now, and the King's Speech in July 2024 stated that the Labour government will seek to establish appropriate legislation to place requirements on those working to develop the most powerful AI models, but it stopped short of committing to a specific AI bill. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister's introduction included mention of harnessing the power of AI. So the details of the Labour government's approach to AI regulation remain unclear for now. They may well have other things on their mind at the moment. However, there does appear to be a departure from the viewpoint of the previous Conservative government. One of the questions is what might be the consequences of the EU AI Act outside the EU. So, well, if we first consider the effects in the UK, any UK company developing or working with AI systems for the EU market will have to consider the new EU Act. Following in the wake of Brexit, the UK government stance on AI is to use the freedom from EU legislation gained by Brexit to enable innovation and to give as light a touch as possible on legislation and regulation to cut the cost of doing business. But if a business must meet more prescriptive EU legislation to operate there, how much advantage will the UK approach deliver, especially for the few businesses that are domiciled and operating wholly within the UK? And if you're examining the effects of the UK AI framework, there's little clarity from regulators at the moment as to what exactly will be required to achieve compliance. The very wide territorial and sector scope of the EU Act means that organisations developing and using AI in the EU will be covered by it, whether they're in the UK or elsewhere. And we've seen, from the GDPR, how EU legislation can change the approach taken by businesses. and it leads to sort of global changes as businesses complied with the GDPR to enable access to the European market of maybe what is 450, 500 million potential customers. So it's not something that can be simply disregarded. Nations with developing markets understand this and are keen to develop their own legislation in such a way to attract global business. There have been other data protection regimes that align with GDPR in Brazil, India, and other members of the African Union. Many countries may find it convenient to adopt approach to regulation similar to the EU for data protection, and might also do it for AI as well. It's been the case that EU regulation raises the profile of its subject, and already the effects of the AI Act have been seen in the actions of other countries which are keen to be at the forefront of technology and seem to be using AI to drive their economy. China's keen to be a leading AI innovation centre and has developed Chinese cybersecurity law and the new generation AI development plan to provide measures in China. Canada's introduced key government-led programs, and these initiatives sit alongside its own personal data protection legislation known as PIPEDA to regulate the collection, use and disclosure of individuals' personal information using AI technologies. So the EU's action is a clear commitment to regulating AI to protect its citizens, to allay fears from European technology companies that they're falling behind, and hopefully to get early domination of the technology markets away from US companies, and to offer a stable environment for AI companies in which to operate.
Thank you, Maritn. So just a final question for you. What does all of this mean for organisations that are developing and using AI?
Well, whilst the development of AI systems in technology has been conducted so far in a fragmented and threadbare regulatory and legislative environment, that's now changing. Some retrospective work may be necessary for existing players in the market, and newcomers should use the opportunity to prepare for future AI development. So that would include obtaining specialist advice on AI legislation and associated topics such as data protection and information security. And they should take a look at any existing products they use or provide which qualify as an AI system under the legislation. And they should be asking their advisors about whether those products are caught by the legislation, which category of risk they fall under, their compliance role, and their obligations under those roles. And finally, should be devising a plan to comply with their obligations and integrating those obligations within their wider compliance framework, looking for governance synergies with other areas of compliance such as data protection and information security.
Fabulous. Thank you very much, Maritn. So for any of our listeners that want to learn some more about this subject, Maritn's written a blog on our website, urmconsulting.com, which is called the EU Artificial Intelligence Act. So do go and give that a read, and thank you for listening today. If you've enjoyed this podcast, we would really appreciate it if you could spare a moment to leave a rating or review at ratethispodcast.com/InfoSec Insider. To listen to more episodes, you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and Podbean.
Thank you for listening to URM's InfoSec Insider podcast. For more information, visit our website at urmconsulting.com.